permission to tape record myself. I like to listen to myself again later in order to better myself next time. But when it comes to questions and answers sessions, I will turn it off. So you can call me names, so criticize me for my comments. I appreciate this opportunity very much. Mr. Scott kindly mentioned that I have a very busy schedule, but it is my own responsibility. I only had Monday and Tuesday to offer my humble service to you, and my host said still it was all right. I worried about your cost effectiveness, but then I said I would do anything from morning to evening. But after the invitation was finalized, I somewhat cunningly stepped up my schedule and got away from my office 2 days earlier in order to ski one day in Wakapapa in North Island, which I enjoyed tremendously. Actually, I was back to Christchurch in '92 for the annual Japan-New Zealand Business Council meeting. And the stay was very short because I had to go to Melbourne for JA, Japan-Australia Business Cooperation Committee meetings. Last night at this Festival of Japan event, my good friend Ambassador Taniguchi really stole the show by being most un-Japanese diplomat-like. Don't say he was undiplomatic, but I emphasize most un-Japanese in sharing his sense of humor with his audience. I liked a few of his lines so much that I'm going to quote some of those with your consent. I'm sure you will approve of these because I have offered a couple to you earlier. I like that one about the Japanese being always so hesitant and doing a lot of preparation and still reading the formal speech. He said the Japanese diplomat would think twice before saying nothing. I like that. But if I say that, I don't think it will be in good taste. It's one thing for a diplomat to say it about himself, but not for someone else to say it. In fact, in breaking the ice in cross-cultural communication, I have found over these years that ridiculing oneself or self-effacing or self-deprecating is a pretty safe game to play, almost for anyone. I have seen numerous examples and I have interpreted them, and these humorous remarks, I have always enjoyed interpreting jokes, and I have taken particular interest in conveying the personality or the style or the warmth of the speaker. To me, it is most important not to just convey the words and the meanings, but the style and what manners of person the speaker is. There's a general, pretty stereotyped or stereotypical image of we Japanese people. In fact, when I say we Japanese, I'm stereotyping ourselves. We always like to talk about we Japanese, but I'm Japanese after all, and I cannot always completely exempt myself from that classification. The old classical joke goes like the following: when joke is only half told, the French, or let's say the Frenchman, would burst out into laughter. The Englishman would wait until the end of the joke and laugh. The German, after philosophizing all night, will laugh next morning. And Japanese wearing a full smile without understanding it. Often we are quizzed or sometimes criticized for smiling even when we don't understand the joke. Asked, how come you are smiling when you don't understand it? The answer I recommend to my fellow countrymen or countrywomen is that while we value harmony in the gathering, so rather than being a wet blanket I would laugh or smile with you, and later suffer trying to analyze what the meaning was. Another formula that I've been recommending to my audience in Japan in recent years is, if you don't understand a joke, let's not pretend that you understand. Not wear sober face. And if you ask, how come you're not laughing? Answer that I'm going back to my office and have a conference and decide whether to laugh or not. Now, jokes aside, but the jokes, I think, nevertheless, are fun and often very educational or convenient in conveying the points, and they are better remembered. About our culture, different cultural values that affect investment. To the well-experienced audience such as yours, I hardly need to remind you that we need a little more patient, longer-term perspective or outlook when you are dealing with the Japanese for business transactions or investment in particular, because we value long-term and particularly personal relationships, which is something you just have to cultivate. One visit will, of course, not accomplish generally what you need. At the same time, the Japanese tend to overemphasize it. And please be assured that on our side, we are doing soul searching, that we should change our thinking pattern and step up our decision-making process in order to really internationalize ourselves and be a better member of the international business community. Yet, decision-making process is a function of a particular culture. In your culture, in many other Anglo-American cultures, decision-making often is in the hands of the people at the top. In our case, it takes the form of collective decisions. You have heard about the Ringi, R-I-N-G-I, where a piece of paper with some proposal, generally coming from the lower level of the managerial or bureaucratic echelon, and the idea is presented to a higher and higher echelon. For each round, every department or section head places his or her chops or hanko. Chop, I don't think is a very nice word, but the seal, in order to indicate your approval or at least consent or acquiescence. The old story is that if you don't like the proposal, but you don't want to rock the boat, so you just put your seal, just to be a member of the gang, you tilt your seal slightly. Degrees depending on the degree of your resentment or disagreement. If you really don't like the proposal and don't like the guy who originated it, you put your name upside down, and everybody is supposed to understand it. But I think that story today is rapidly becoming passé. Many Japanese corporations, as you know, are streamlining their decision-making organizations. The famous electronic company, my son, a graduate engineer, happens to work there, and I don't intend to be partial to it, but it's probably the world's best known four-letter word electronic company, starting with S. Recently abolished the departments and called each department such and such company. And for lack of proper Japanese nomenclature, they call all these divisions such and such company. Sony Consumer Audio Visual Company. It's a headache because when spelled in katakana phonetics, it takes so many centimeters to write, but that's one Sony consumer audio visual company. That's where my son works in, designing some components of the video tape recorder, video camcorder. And the head of each now company, which used to be division, headed by a general manager, is now called presidento in Japanese. Again, for lack of adequate nomenclature, they settled for presidento, not to be translated as shacho, because there's, after all, Sony Incorporated has only one shacho, president. But each one is now at least morally responsible as president of a company to make its own profit, to come up with sound bottom line. And that's quite a drastic revolutionary change going on in Sony. That was started actually when Mr. Morita was still quite healthy. He had a bad habit of getting up too early and playing tennis before work. Early tennis is bad for your health. I have always known that. That's why when I play tennis during week, I play like 1 to 2 a.m. when the system is still fully awake. Then next morning I sleep late. And back to this long-term personal relationship. I think it's when dealing with Japanese businesses, it is still pretty much the matter of establishing personal ties. We should not overemphasize this aspect, but we should not underestimate it. While you should have sound business-based relationship between two business organizations, it should be further augmented and fortified with very good personal relationships. This importance cannot be overemphasized. You may have contractual relationship, but you know the way the Japanese read contracts. We interpret them to suit our convenience from time to time. That is why in Japanese contract, at least among and within Japanese parties, we always like to keep the contracts short, 3 articles, if at all possible. There's no saying about, as for law, 3 articles shall suffice. Somebody clever said that many centuries ago, who said that 法は3章にして足る. 3 articles should be sufficient. And then add an appendix. If there's a doubt or if there's any problem, both parties shall discuss the matter in good faith. And with that appendix, it is supposed that we don't need lawyers. I'm sorry, I'm sure there are some lawyers, but lawyers are such well-established profession that I think they don't mind making fun of themselves. And some of the finest jokes have been written by lawyers. And in Japan, of course, the very institution of lawyers is quite different from yours. US society, I think, is not as bad to me as the United States of America. They are really litigious society. Americans themselves complain about there being too many lawyers. In many US-Japan trade negotiations, Americans often used to, at least, joke about shipping some of their surplus lawyers to Japan to correct the trade imbalance. That kind of jokes make Japanese negotiators a bit uncomfortable because we don't know how to reply. But the very Japanese word for lawyer is sometimes a source of controversy because a lawyer as an institution in our culture is not to be contemptuous about, but something to be avoided. The Japanese idiom, 弁護士沙汰にする, to make it a lawyer's matter, to make it a legal case, means the American equivalent is to make a federal case out of something, to blow it out of proportion. Now that is to be discouraged. That is to be frowned upon. That is why when many of these anecdotes that I have collected in the course of my interpreting career going back to 1956 or going back to 1949, if I include those pre-simultaneous interpreting days, are so old that often younger members of the audience don't quite recognize the names involved. So names don't mean very much, but suffice it to say that one U.S. Secretary of Agriculture in Washington, in the course of bilateral Japan-U.S. cabinet level economic and trade affairs committee meeting, was entertaining his opposite number, a Japanese Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry. Fishery wasn't included at that time. And, well, it's a matter of record. This was written up in the press somewhere long time ago, so I'm not divulging any state secret. He was Mr. Orville Freeman. He had read the biographical background of his Japanese counterpart. That was the late Mr. Akagi, Minister of Agriculture and Forestry. The resume said he was a graduate of the Imperial University of Tokyo before the war, and Department of Jurisprudence, Department of Law. So at the beginning of the conversation over a lunch table, Mr. Freeman tried to break the ice by asking him a perfectly friendly question. I understand you are a lawyer, Mr. Minister. And the interpreter there wasn't me. I was at another table attending our foreign minister and the U.S. Secretary of State, who was Dean Rusk at that time. But you know, when you have been doing simultaneous interpreting for so many years, you keep hearing other people's conversation while doing your own interpreting. I couldn't help but understanding what they were talking about. That interpreter translated these words as, 大臣は弁護士だそうですね. He translated the word lawyer into 弁護士. But 弁護士 is only one of several translations for the word lawyer. 弁護士 means an attorney who is actually practicing. I don't mean doing homework, but practicing law. That is 弁護士. But someone who studied law in school days but is in politics today is not a 弁護士, and therefore in our mind he's not a lawyer. But when translated as 弁護士, the Japanese politician took offense. He said with a rather thick Tochigi accent, north of Tokyo, in the boondocks. No offense meant, a lovely accent. He said, "Nani?" And he stared at the interpreter. People who are not accustomed to communicating through interpreters often talk to the interpreter, which is wrong. You should never even look at the interpreter. Never speak to the interpreter. Never ask the interpreter, will you please tell the guest if he is interested in, etc. But instead, look at your guest or counterpart right in his or her eye and speak as if you understand my language, leaving the rest to the interpreter to worry about. But he stared at the interpreter and said, "Nani? わしは弁護士なんかじゃねえ." In the very rough and crude Japanese, if I would venture to translate that into American colloquial English, that would mean, "Hell no, I ain't no lawyer." This is what he sounded like. And momentarily, poor Mr. Freeman was embarrassed, and he wondered he had committed some blunder. Well, soon it was all right. No war was declared between the two countries. But this indicates that the very word lawyer has different values, different meanings. Lawyer is something we want to avoid. For anyone to be called, understand you a lawyer. In English, it merely means you study law, right? Or you are a lawyer by background, or you are a lawyer by training. But that word lawyer should not be translated as 弁護士、法律専門家, or someone specializing in law. Or in more colloquial Japanese, I would have interpreted that as 大臣は法律ご専門だそうですね。Minister, you studied or you majored in American English, or you specialized in law, didn't you? And the minister would have said, oh, it's not much of law, in sort of self-effacing manner. That would have perfectly broken the ice. So, in negotiating with the Japanese, this brings the matter of course, lawyers. In your culture, you would always have a legal counsel on your side. Good for you, and I'm not recommending against it, but keep him quiet, and at least in the presence of the Japanese company, because to see a lawyer or bengoshi as we see it, a defense or sort of attorney in the sense of for litigation purpose, even one's presence somewhat annoys the Japanese or makes us nervous. So if you have one, it's all right to introduce that person as a legal counselor or legal advisor, horis common, but not as bengoshi. The minute you use the word bengoshi, it conveys the image that there is a case that needs defense. In other words, it's going to be a litigious affair. No, why rock the boat? And there was one Japanese-American conference recently in Tokyo where I was heading the team of simultaneous interpreters. And on the American side, I saw an American lawyer, a very capable lawyer, and I wondered why he was present. I had known him for about 15 years. So I went up, and before the conference, nudged him and said, I think I know why they asked you to be here. Yes. And just as I suspected, the U.S. side was worried that what they were doing with the Japanese counterpart, it was a perfectly innocuous, broad-ranged representation of Japanese business and industrial community and their counterparts from the several states in the United States. But they were worried that Department of Justice, antitrust people, might regard it as a sort of a collusion or something to bust. They have trust busters still. And he was merely listening to the whole thing. I don't think he was even taking notes. I think it was very clever of him not to be seen taking notes. He was merely listening to make sure that people wouldn't say anything that might even cause the Justice Department people to worry, so that then he can later assure his clients, that's all right, you didn't do anything wrong, or something like that. So these, the aspects of law and lawyers make a lot of difference in our business dealings. I'm not being very investment specific in my talks because my experience is not directly relevant to your investment decisions, but again, decision making is a time-consuming process, and the patience is considered to be a virtue. And I think even if you are impatient, and even if you are internally furious about those Japanese, whatever adjective to be supplied by you, you should never show it. Showing impatience or even the slightest degree of anger is taken as lack of virtue in the old-fashioned Japanese or even Oriental way. You are supposed to suppress yourself, control yourself, then that, to be able to suppress that, is the sign of your being a big person, omono. So it's worth your, biting your bullets and be patient. We don't mind what you talk about us among yourselves, and we do that too among the Japanese. So it's quite mutual. So decision making is time-consuming and also collective. One should never cause a Japanese speaker or negotiator to lose his faith by pressing for a quick answer today in the course of this roundtable discussion, because the chances are he would have to go back and bring it up to his board or to his department heads by passing the buck, not passing the buck, but by circulating the proposal with the slip for ringi, a lot of seals. An old joke Ambassador Taniguchi is certainly familiar with about a small lifeboat on the rough seas with people from various nations aboard, and with the high waves, the skipper, the captain, was worried about the boat sinking, and to save women and children, naturally, he would encourage men of different nationalities to pick up the life jacket and jump and swim. And this is supposed to show different national reactions to the organizational decision-making process. To an Englishman, the captain will merely remind him that it's the sporting thing to do. He would oblige, certainly. To the German, it's very simple. The captain shouts, it's the captain's command, and German would jump immediately. To the Italian, he would tell him, don't jump, it's against the rule, and he would jump just for the heck of it, breaking the rule. I think it's actually a wonderful Italian trait of defiance against the rules and authority. The Italians themselves like to tell jokes about these things. And I've heard different versions about what makes an Aussie to jump or what makes a Kiwi jump. But since they are not relevant, now I'll skip them. If you're interested, I'll later tell you. But to the Japanese, the very important thing is, or to a Yankee, to an American, the captain is, don't worry, I bought big life insurance on you, he would jump. And to the Japanese, he would have to approach him very cautiously and whisper to him, sir, everybody else is doing it. Everybody. I spoke too softly, but I'm assuming that Japanese businessman here. Everybody else is doing it. If everybody else is doing it, yes, of course, the Japanese businessman will certainly jump. I think this Japanese trait for following the suit, following the leader, or watching what others do. But this also indicates that we like to conduct our survey, do our homework, and assess the situation before making decisions. These are funny jokes, but if told in proper circumstances with the proper tone, it educates us about different nations, different responses to a certain situation. And I have other points and anecdotes, but at this time, may I throw the floor open to more discussions. I would welcome your critical comments, and if at any point I'll turn the microphone off. And